Welcome everyone to the Advancing PREA office hours, the outside reporting focus. We'll be talking about the PREA standard itself, the RCC's role in supporting your agencies or your facilities in identifying an outside reporting agency, what your particular role is in navigating the reporting process with detention facilities. And then we'll have some time to connect with each other in a breakout session and ask each other some questions and answer some questions that we have for you all. So we have only about an hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started, but continue to introduce yourselves. And we'll be checking the chat for those messages. So as I mentioned, I'm Marcela Rojas Salas. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the project managers here at Valor US and have been on the Advancing PREA project for a little over 2 years now. Almost
it out.
And I see that some folks may still be unmuted, so I'm going to mute folks if I hear anything. But if folks have anything they want to add, feel free to raise your hands or add something in the chat. Definitely want to hear from folks. But I will pass it on to Jenica and Jessica today to introduce themselves.
Jenica, you want to go first?
Yeah, hi folks. My name is Jenica Sinor. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the project coordinator here at Valor US, and I'm the newest part of the team, but I've been an advocate, a PREA advocate at a previous role, and have some experience in rape crisis centers overall. So happy to be here and happy to meet all of you.
Definitely. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Seifel. I'm a senior program director with Just Detention International. Looking forward to having this conversation with you all. I know that this is one of those PREA standards that can get a little confusing, I think, particularly for corrections folks. So, folks have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Now's the time.
Thanks, Jessica. One of the roles that we play is clarifying things for the correctional facility. So we'll help you do that in a moment here. But just a couple things. As I said, feel free to drop some questions or comments in the chat. If you need to clarify something with us, feel free to drop something in the chat or raise your hands with the function down at the bottom of the Zoom room. And then later on, when we have the recording, we will go ahead and upload that to our website. And in addition to that, we'll have our slides up. If anybody is on the phone, dialing in from the phone, make sure that you press *6 to mute yourself and then *6 to unmute yourself if you'd like to share with us. Just a little note on that. And then we will have one breakout session. So just a heads up, I know that sometimes folks get a little bit nervous about answering questions or things like that. We're not going to try to stump you with any questions if you don't know the answers. That is also helpful to us and helps us kind of know what it is that we need to be training folks on. So I'm going to momentarily here just mute some folks because I can hear some feedback over here. And moving into just talk about Valor's mission. But first, we're going to talk about JDI's mission first.
Yeah, so for any folks who are not aware, even if you are aware, here's a little refresher. JDI stands for Just Detention International. We are a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. We have an office in LA, an office in DC, and an office in South Africa. We do a lot of work with rape crisis centers and victim advocates, state coalitions, as well as work with corrections officials, both heads of agencies and then line staff and everyone in between. And we do a lot of training and technical assistance and advocacy work on behalf of incarcerated survivors. And if you want to go to the next slide, please. Our core principle is that no matter what crime a person may have committed, that rape is not part of the penalty, and that when the government takes away someone's freedom, it takes on an absolute responsibility to keep that person safe.
Thanks, Jessica. And then Valor US, very similar missions, very similar goals. And we are committed to preventing and ending sexual violence by advancing equity and eradicating oppression. We provide leadership, vision, and resources to rape crisis centers, individuals, and other entities committed to ending sexual violence. And ultimately, we envision a world free from violence, where the dignity of every person is valued and respected. So a little bit about our project. Really, we've been around for about 7 years now, and we came together with Just Attention International to really be able to build some strong relationships between our California state prisons, county jail staff, juvenile halls, and rape crisis centers, and to create some really sustainable agreements between these two organizations and two institutions, to really be able to create some accessible victim services for folks behind bars. And I know that there can be some challenges and misunderstandings in that. And that's where we come in to provide that sort of support and find those patterns of challenges and intervene in those. So with that being said, we'll get into the objectives for today's office hours, and that is to understand the advocate's role in the reporting process as envisioned by the PREA standards. Secondly is to understand the difference between an outside reporting agency and a third-party report. Those things often get mixed up, and we want to get really clear about what that is. And then last but not least, help you all help the county jails and the juvenile halls and all the facilities that don't quite have an outside reporting agency to identify some really reliable and trusting organizations, because ultimately these are the folks that are taking in PREA reports and forwarding them to those facilities, and we want to be able to make sure that those folks are handling those reports with care. But before we get into that, we're going to start with the PREA standards, so I'll pass it over to Jessica to talk about this standard in particular.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to enter into the chat a standard in focus document. Folks may be familiar with these. There's a series of them for various standards. Now, I do want to just with a caveat say that these documents are for corrections. So there's going to be a whole lot of stuff in there that is not applicable to you all and is not necessary for you all to know to do this work. But at the same time, it can be really helpful to get an understanding of what the guidance is that corrections facilities are being given. These documents, like I said, there's a series of them for different standards. They're really, really helpful in identifying sort of what the purpose of the standards are, what some of the best practices are, and what some of the challenges are that corrections agencies may face. This particular standards in focus is the one that we're going to be covering today. Which is 115.1, inmate, detainee, and resident reporting. If you want to go to the next slide, please. In essence, this standard is intended to give survivors that are incarcerated multiple ways to report, right? We know that the more options that folks have, the more likely it is that folks are going to try to take advantage of one of those options, right? So survivors, whether they have been abused inside a facility or prior to entering a facility, must be able to report to any staff member, any contractor, any volunteer. Anyone who works or volunteers in a corrections facility is a mandated reporter, except for you all. That's an important distinction to make. Otherwise, anytime someone is made aware of sexual abuse or even suspected sexual abuse is required to report it. Reports can be done in writing, but they can also be done verbally. And I do want to say actually real quick about the writing. There are, formal avenues that folks can make reports, whether it's the grievance process or something of that nature, but it doesn't have to go through that formal process. So if someone just like writes down on a piece of paper, this happened to me and hands it to someone, that's considered a formal report, even if it's not being done on formal grievance documentation or anything like that. Reports can also be made anonymously. This can be a huge challenge for a lot of corrections agencies, but they can be made anonymously, so without using someone's name. And there's also no requirement to name an abuser as well. That's not anything that should get in the way of someone being able to make a report. Now, folks can also make reports via third parties. And so a third party is, for example, someone's grandma or their partner, their friend, their lawyer, someone out in the community who is making a report on behalf of somebody. So there should be, and this is usually on a facility or agency's website, a phone number or an email address or some way of contacting the PREA staff usually at the facility where someone on the outside can make a report on someone's behalf. And that report is to be taken as seriously as if the survivor was making the report themselves. I think that's something that is really unique to corrections facilities. That's not really something that I think out in the community, you can't necessarily make a report on someone else's behalf. They are going to need to talk to that survivor directly, right, in order to take that report. And that's not something that needs to be done in a facility. And then finally, survivors must also be given the option to report to an outside reporting entity. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the outside reporting entity is some agency or community organization or some other entity that is not at all connected to or answers to the corrections facility. And their sole purpose here is to take reports and forward them to whoever, the appropriate person at the facility. Now, we've heard from a lot of rape crisis centers all over the place that very frequently, corrections agencies are asking rape crisis centers to fulfill this role. This is not something that we recommend folks do. We do not believe it's best practice for rape crisis centers to be named formally as an outside reporting entity in order for corrections to comply with that part of the standard. It really kind of blurs the line a little bit in terms of, what, the services that you all provide and confidentiality and all of that kind of stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't make a report on someone's behalf, right? There could be any number of reasons why it would be appropriate, for you as an advocate to do that. But that outside reporting entity should be a different organization. So it could be something like an Office of Inspector General, an ombudsperson, a Crime Stoppers hotline. It could be a different law enforcement agency, any sort of other entity that does not answer to the facility.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So we're going to go into a breakout session here. We just wanted to give you a quick intro to what outside reporting agencies are. We're going to talk about them a little bit more. But first, we just want to get a sense of, do you know the outside reporting agency for your local detention facility? Has your agency been asked or expected to be the outside reporting agency? And how do you currently navigate clients asking you to make a report on their behalf, especially when they're not trusting of the staff, they don't have an outside reporting agency, and so you may be the only agency that they do trust to make that report. So third question is a little more complicated, a little more convoluted. There is no, sort of right or wrong answer here. We just want to get a sense of what are folks doing. So we're going to get into some breakout sessions, probably go into 3 for about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and debrief for about 5 minutes as well. Jessica or Jenica, did you want to add anything before I open up the breakout rooms?
No, I don't think so. I'm just looking forward to hearing directly from folks and seeing how things are going.
Sounds good. Same here. I am going to open up these breakout sessions, and I will see you all in a bit. And the co-host can either go now or wait and move when you're ready. It's up to you. So I'm opening the rooms now.
Sure.
And we'll come back at around 1:20. See you in a bit. Okay, I'm probably going to join the first room.
How y'all doing?
Pretty good.
Good. How are you? Doing well. Sorry, there's a lot of noise in the background.
It did stop. Okay, now we're back from the breakout sessions, and now we're going to get into our debrief conversation. Thanks, Jessica. So I think we can go to my group first. The first group, I think we had Devin and Janice and Trisha, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting somebody else's name, I'm sure. But what did we talk about? Some folks said that they were the outside reporting agency. Other folks said we are not the outside reporting agency. So I saw Brianna clapping her hand there. I don't know if you want to add a little bit more to that and share who your outside reporting agency is in Riverside.
I was just gonna say I was part of the group, your group, and ours is Riverside Valley Crime Stoppers.
Okay, very cool. Most folks I think might say Crime Stoppers. And then I know other folks in the group said they're new, and we're going to find out who the outside reporting agency is. So that's a part of the goal for this office hours is if you don't know who it is, go out and talk to your facility and find out who it is. So I won't put y'all on the spot for that. Do we want to go to Jessica's group?
Sure, yeah. Let's see. I had Carl, Rochelle, and Yesenia. And we, luckily nobody is the outside reporting agency or really has been, asked to do that. It seems like that role is sort of really understood. Carl was talking about how it's the incarcerated folks that very frequently, don't understand the difference, and why would they, right? So they're calling thinking that they're, calling a reporting line. And so having to kind of explain what, the rape crisis center's role is and isn't can definitely be really challenging. And Carl, I don't know if you wouldn't mind just sharing, one of the solutions that you all found to kind of provide that education right off the bat.
Yeah, whenever someone contacts our agency, either through phone or letter correspondence, the first thing we do is we send them the Hope for Healing packet and a template on our letterhead that talks, about our agency, kind of very specifically sets the parameters of the scope of care that we can provide specifically for PREA work. Lets them know that with the release of information form, we can contact this and this agency about confidentiality, and kind of that we don't have any legal representation or offer any legal advice, and just really set the boundaries around that. And then once I send a personal letter, so to speak, I speak a little bit more about that and just let them know almost immediately that I don't want any expectations to be shattered. I don't want anyone upset because of a misunderstanding. So that's kind of why I lay it down very, very quickly. And I think for the most part, I haven't had any real pushback or problems with that. I think once people get a better understanding of who we are, and it doesn't mean that we can't assist them in that process, right? We can definitely assist them, but it's only with the release of information signed. And I don't need to have every detail of the incident because they're going to be interviewed anyhow. And I'm also there to support them during that interview process. So that's kind of what has worked for us. That template has been in our agency since time immemorial. It was created long before I even started doing the work, to be honest with you. And it's really very simple, but it lays it out in a good way.
That's awesome, Carl. One of the ways I think that templates are useful is explaining your scope of work, being clear about what you can and cannot do, and then the rest of that gets personalized. But I think it helps like new advocates to be really clear about setting boundaries. This is what we can and cannot do. So if you'd like to share that with any other advocates, or any other advocates are wondering how to explain those things, reach out and we can support you with that. And Jessica, were you going to add something? I don't know if I cut you
off.
Oh,
no, I don't know if either of the other folks that were in our group want to add anything, but
yeah,
Carl did a good job covering it.
Yeah, I'm seeing Elisa or Eliza, how do you manage assigned ROI during COVID? We have limitations on entering the detention facilities currently. I don't know if that was a question for us or a question specifically for Carl, but we can both answer that. I don't know, Carl, if you want to share a bit about how you handle that first.
Yeah, to be honest with you, when I actually started taking over the PREA work full-time was right before COVID broke. So I wasn't doing any in-person visits or any of that. And almost all of our contacts were letter correspondence. So whenever someone, once I explained all that and they still wanted to proceed with my assistance in that area, I'll just send them that release of information form. I would highlight where they needed to sign it. I would send them 2 copies, one for them to keep for themselves, one to sign and return back to me. And then I don't keep any papers, documents, or forms that anyone sends me. That's also part of our template, because we just had cases and cases of paper for no reason. So whenever someone sends me something in that template, it explains to them that we don't keep any documentation that they send to us. We will review and then shred and destroy properly. From that point, what I do is it's really slowed down, but that was problematic. But what I do is once I have that, I upload that to their file. I keep all of the letter correspondence between me and any client on our drive. So it literally is letter in, letter out, along with our civil court services. And so that's kind of how I dealt with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I definitely wrote that down.
And I won't add anything else to that, Carl. You kind of covered it. It's really through letter correspondence that we suggest folks to send the ROI. Let's go to Jenica's group. What did folks talk about in your group, Jenica?
Thank you. So I had the privilege of working with or chatting with Alejandra, Lee, and Eliza. And we had a pretty good variety of folks that were the reporting agencies, some folks that used Crime Stoppers, of course, and then folks that were still kind of exploring or still didn't really know who their reporting agency was because they might be newer in their role. So I got a little bit of mix of all 3. And then we also had Michelle, our PREA intern, with us too. That was really helpful. Folks, do you have anything you want to add to that, or what, as you've worked with your reporting agency or with your institution overall, like what does that look like for you? I just want to add.
And if you covered it, that's okay too. We're going to talk a little bit more. It sounds like some folks are at the place where they realize they're the outside reporting agency and that may not be their role or may not need to be, or that they're still exploring. So this is where we're going to talk about what your role is, get really clear on that, and then how you can support the county jail. So I'm going to share my screen again and then pass it back to Jessica. Thanks, Jenica.
Sorry, I started talking. I think I was muted. All right, so let's talk a moment just about the role that you all are playing in the reporting process. So we've, in some of the breakout groups, I'm sure you all mentioned confidentiality. That is, of course, what separates you from every staff person or person who volunteers in a facility, is your sort of mandate, your legal obligation to survivors to maintain their confidentiality, and that can kind of confuse the purpose of your services, in terms of whether people are calling to make a report or to call for emotional support. And as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't mean that you can't make a report, but we want to advise you all not to be the default or the first options. Now, if you are making a report, obviously getting that release of information signed, verbal consent, if it's an emergency situation, and that sort of feels sufficient for you all as an agency. You don't want to put in too many barriers to get in the way. So the usual sort of like good way to think about it is, whatever you would do for a survivor out in the community, try to replicate that. Whatever you would need from a survivor in terms of release of information from in the community, replicate that for an incarcerated survivor. Another thing just to think about regarding making a report is that very often, and I don't know if this has been anyone else's experience, but very often if an incarcerated survivor is calling you and asking you to make a report, it's likely they may have already made one. They may have already followed up on a report they made. They may have already exhausted all of their sort of grievance process options. And instead of making a report, what they're really asking from you is to check on the status of a report that they've already made, or try to get someone to follow up with them. Chances are they've probably, like I said, already made one. And so one of the things that you want to ask, if someone does reach out to you all and ask to make a report, just ask, have you already made one? Have you told anybody? Remember, even if they tell someone verbally, that's still a report, even if they don't necessarily think they're filing a report. If they're not using the grievance process, for example, it's still considered a report. So you want to ask them, have you talked to anyone else about what has happened before you move forward, with deciding how you're going to respond. Obviously, one of your roles is to provide options. So you want to talk with that person about the different reporting options that are available. That's why it's really helpful to know what those options are in advance, whether that's, Crime Stoppers or another law enforcement agency, and to have that contact information handy with you. So if you're on the phone with someone, or even if you're doing like an accompaniment or something like that, that you can find that information really easily and provide it to that person. And obviously, providing that emotional support and crisis intervention, while someone's navigating the process. Now, this is one of the things that I would love to see more of, and I know that this is probably one of the more challenging aspects of the work, is getting those updates from facility staff on the status of a report. This is not something that corrections staff are used to doing. I know a lot of times working with law enforcement, if you have relationships with law enforcement, you may be able to get those kinds of updates on behalf of a survivor. That's something that can just be extra challenging. And so, talking about your sort of role in that before you even start, as part of that relationship building process, I think is really, really helpful, so that when you do, or if you are, calling a PREA coordinator to ask for an update, they're like, they know what that means, right? Because you've already kind of had those conversations about that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, I can't reiterate it enough, but as rape crisis centers, you should not be the identified outside reporting agency. Now, again, you can make a report, but in terms of PREA compliance, in terms of what a facility is using to prove to an auditor that they're compliant with this standard, it should not be the rape crisis center. And auditors are trained to know that. They know that that's not best practice. It is the responsibility of the detention facility to identify an outside reporting agency if it's not going to be you all, right? Now, again, usually it's another law enforcement agency or Crime Stoppers or whatever, but it is on the detention center to do that. And whatever that entity is cannot answer to the detention facility. So, for example, I'm thinking of, a county jail, right? There may be, other entities within the sheriff's department. They can't be that outside reporting entity. It can be another county agency, but it has to be an agency that is separate from the facility, if that makes sense. So it could be like CPS or, something like that. But one that is not sort of intermingling with the facility. That outside reporting entity should have a formal MOU, just like you all do, for taking those reports and for forwarding them to whoever the appropriate person is in a timely manner. You all, as experts in your community, can absolutely support a detention facility in identifying who that should be. And you can actually connect with the outside reporting entity and maybe provide any training on taking reports, on trauma-informed survivor-centered care, all of that kind of stuff. So you can actually be part of the process. But again, you want to avoid being that ultimate identified reporting entity.
Thanks so much, Jessica. I think it can get really confusing. Like, can we make reports? When should we make reports? Should we be the outside reporting agency? So we want to be really clear about what your role is here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between an outside reporting agency and a third-party report. I think these two terms often get confused in the PREA standards. Sometimes they get used interchangeably, but the main difference is that an outside reporting agency is determined by the detention facility and must be an agency with the capacity to receive PREA reports from survivors or third parties. And they must have the capacity to make the reports to the detention facility itself. Can't be like an answering agency. They won't be able to make a report. And a third party report is determined by the survivor itself and includes the following: a friend, a family member, an acquaintance, a trusted community member, maybe somebody from a faith-based organization. Just about anybody in a survivor's life can make a report. And I think that oftentimes you may get letters from survivors who say, I made a report, my family made a report, nothing has happened yet. Can you make a report? And that's where, those sort of exigent circumstances we often hear in the PREA standards come in, where everyone's made a report and now it's kind of your role to maybe not necessarily make a report, but to get an update on where that report has gone. Okay, so before I get into the examples of outside reporting agencies, and Jessica kind of already talked about this already, but I want to talk about establishing an outside reporting agency and how that really it differs from your confidential counseling hotline with your rape crisis center. An outside reporting agency is a pre-established agency that receives and immediately forwards reports of sexual abuse and harassment to facility officials, really allowing the survivor to remain entirely anonymous upon the request. And it's important that facility officials really understand the difference between your reporting line, your rape crisis center's confidential counseling line, especially when providing information and referrals to the people in their custody. I think folks mentioned in the breakout sessions that it's not necessarily the facility that gets confused, it's the survivors, but oftentimes it's the survivors that are receiving information from facility officials. Oh, you could just call the rape crisis center for anything related to sexual abuse. And it kind of just becomes this all-encompassing service that they may not be clear on. So you may need to train your staff to explain, we're actually not the reporting agency, we can help you make a report, have you made a report, and really being able to ask those clarifying questions like Jessica mentioned, so that you know what your role is. Because the survivor may not know exactly what you need to know to get that, give them the help that they need. And so it may be your role to ask some follow-up questions to them and make sure that you're doing the right thing, taking the right next step. Jessica mentioned this already. For the outside reporting agencies, there has to be an agreement in place with the correctional facility and the outside reporting agency to really be able to formalize the relationship. And so state prisons run by CDCR have an agreement already with the Office of Inspector General. And so it's really recommended that if you're a rape crisis center who doesn't know who their outside reporting agency is for their county jails or their county-run juvenile halls, that you go ahead and ask them who that is. And once there is an understanding of what that is, you can go ahead and update your outreach materials. You can make sure that not just your outreach materials, but also your internal protocol for the types of reporting agencies and reporting options that you can give to survivors of detention, making sure those things get updated again. And like Jessica mentioned, your role may be, once that is already established, once the outside reporting agency is already established, that you provide training to that agency on trauma-informed care, how to receive reports in a kind manner. I think that sometimes if they don't get that training, they may ask some victim blaming questions. They may ask questions that don't need to get asked. They're not investigators, they're people that receive reports. And so that's something that they need to be really clear on. They don't need to ask, additional questions that are unnecessary, right? Generally, an outside reporting agency is governed completely separately from the correctional facility and may have some sort of investigative responsibilities for crimes committed in the facility, like the OIG, but that's not a mandatory thing. It just happens to overlap sometimes. Even more importantly, the identified agency should not contract, like I mentioned, with an answering service, because they have to be able to forward the reports. It has to be someone who's responding live. And because the identified agency is not the local rape crisis center and is not responsible entirely for providing emotional support or crisis intervention, it is recommended that the outside reporting agency provide a referral to the local rape crisis center. And that's another way for you all to be part of the system, but be part of the reporting system without being the primary people that receive the reports, but rather that you get integrated as part of the emotional support, crisis intervention, advocacy piece of the report. And so now I'll get to the examples. I know a lot of folks have mentioned Crime Stoppers was a good agency to have as an outside reporting agency. Some folks might have mentioned the police department or another law enforcement agency. The district attorney's office might be a good place to go to, or the public defender's office. I know that some folks with juvenile halls in their service area may have to report to child protective services agencies. And then last but not least, like I mentioned before, CDCR facilities have the Office of Inspector General. Sorry, I'm kind of squinting here because I'm recovering from a cold. So if you see me kind of closing my eyes, you know why. And then in terms of offering out options to your detention facility, I think this is a piece to be really clear that it's not your responsibility to identify who the agency is. You can support them, but you also don't want them to completely give you the responsibility and hand that over. In terms of like building that relationship, that's a relationship that they really need to build. But what you can do is, again, utilize your own resources, your community resources, your established relationships, because you're ultimately going to be the folks that know who to trust in the community, who would be a good agency to be able to receive those reports. Because really, we don't want people within those agencies to be victim blaming, to be shaming folks, to be saying, well, that's not really our PREA report. We don't want any of that happening. And so we want to intervene in that way by providing some trusting organizations. And then collect a list of reporting options to share with your local detention facility. Maybe you have a few in mind. It's always nice to have a few different options because there may be a few that say, no, we're not going to have the capacity to do that. We don't think that's our role. There may be a whole slew of reasons why people might say no to you. And so having a backup will be a good point. And then once that's already been established, you can share those reporting agency or that one reporting agency with incarcerated survivors and go ahead and update your existing PREA outreach materials, whether that's a brochure that you share with folks, maybe you have a one-pager that you share with folks. And once again, updating your internal protocol so that folks responding to hotline calls, folks responding via letter, know all the different options, know the contact information, and it can include that in letters or share that with folks in hotline calls. And that is all we really have to say about outside reporting agencies at this point. I don't know if Jenica or Jessica have anything to add before we get into questions.
I don't think so. Actually, I take that back. If you all happen to be approached by a detention facility who's asking you all to be the outside reporting entity, please feel free to send them our information as well, particularly if they're struggling, with understanding the difference or identifying, an entity to be the outside reporting agency. We're happy to talk with them as well.
Yeah, and happy to talk with you all too to figure out like how to share that with them in case they're wanting you to become the outside reporting agency. And we have a couple different resources that come from the PREA Resource Center that talk about why RCCs are not the outside reporting agency, why it's important for them to designate a different outside reporting agency separate from the role that you play. So we've got those resources for you, and we'll definitely upload them onto our website once the recording's available. So back to you all in case you have any questions. I'll stop the share. Actually, I won't stop the share. I'm gonna keep this up because I have some additional resources I want to share with y'all. So you can feel free to unmute yourself or drop a question in the chat. I'll give folks a moment to think about it and go through these resources and then come back to questions. So a couple of resources we have the Valor US resource. If you have not checked out our website, definitely check out our website. We have many resources, not just about PREA, but many other issue areas in our field. And then we have Just Detention International, which is solely dedicated to serving survivors behind bars. Thanks for adding that to the chat, Jessica. And then we have the PREA Resource Center, which is really designated for the correctional facilities that you all partner with. But I think it's helpful to know what it is that they're receiving, what kind of information they should know. If they have questions about PREA that you may not be able to answer, you can direct them to the PREA Resource Center and find a resource for them to read up on. There's webinars on their website. So really, really helpful to share this with your correctional partners as well. And then Jessica, I'll throw this back to you since this is your website, the JDI one pager.
Yeah, so the link that I put in the chat earlier is to basically our archive, if you will, of all the resources that we've made in the 7 years of this project. Anytime we do a webinar or come out with any written resources, we throw them up on this website. So you'll find all kinds of things, training curriculums, facilitator guides, webinar recordings, all kinds of stuff to just provide extra support. So the link again is in the chat.
Thanks, Jessica. And then one more resource from Valor. So this is separate from our Valor US website. This is the Valor Hub, which it's a little bit different. It's a one-stop shop filled with resources, handouts, and trainings, of course, but it is closed off to folks who do have to register to be part of the hub. And there is resources in here that we don't want to share with folks publicly that are a little bit more private, a little bit more confidential. So if you haven't checked that out, check out the hub, get your profile set up, and start exploring the resources on there. Okay, back to questions if folks have any, and I'll stop sharing now. Any questions? And it doesn't need to be about outside reporting agencies. It could be about just about anything related to PREA and supporting incarcerated survivors. It looks like we may not have any. Well, if there are no questions now, then I will invite Jenica and Jessica to drop their emails in the chat for folks to reach out to us. If you email one of us, you're really emailing all of us. We tend to leave.
It's true. It's true.
So you're welcome to CC all three of us or just email one of us, but we hope that you do feel comfortable enough to reach out and ask us questions. And we do have a monthly PREA advocate meeting that happens on Wednesdays, once a month from 2 to 3. If folks have not been able to join or are interested in joining, feel free to reach out to me and I can send you the Zoom link. That's all I've got for you all today. I hope that this was helpful and that you're now able to go back to your facilities and ask a couple questions and then come back to us if you need to clarify or need any sort of technical assistance from us. And appreciate you all for sharing where you're at with identifying your outside reporting agencies.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Bye, take care.
Bye.